All right, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over stage 3 of Cambridge Latin. Today, really, we're just going to cover some of the grammar, and there's not that much grammar that's been introduced into stage 3. Really, the only thing that we're looking at is the introduction of something I've mentioned before, and that is prepositions. And prepositions are words that will go with certain cases, specifically the ablative and the accusative case, to clarify their meaning. They're like adverbs, and in some instances, we'll actually see them later on being used as adverbs. But for right now, they're just going to help us clarify different case usages. So let us go ahead and jump into it with a little bit of background from the past couple stages, just to refresh our memories. So this is our chart so far, our table, and this is our cases. Our cases are in these rows. Nominatives in blue, remember that's the subject, the doer of the action of the sentence. The accusative is in the yellow, and that is the receiver of the action of a sentence. And here we go, we have the ablative in orange. And for, at least for what we've seen so far, it has been the location of a sentence, where it's been happening. So we've seen that with the preposition in plus ablative is a locatival ablative. Now, in the columns that we see here, we see our declensions. Now, remember the declensions. Declensions are the categories that cover form. So cases are how a noun is used. Declensions are the categories that are the forms of how these different cases are formed. So first declension, we've got long a. Second declension, we've got two subsets. The most common is the masculine, us, o, long o, and o. Now notice with neuter, this is going to be something that you're going to see anytime you see neuter, the nominative and accusative forms are going to be the same. They're always going to be the same. But only in the nominative and the accusative. So we'll see that as we go forward, and this happens across all declensions. And there'll be a little bit more on that later. And these are the four subsets of the third declension that we've seen so far. Now there are more, but these are just the ones we've seen. Remember that I said that there's a couple others. For example, the word actor is covered by this first one here. Canis is another one. Grumio rex. And remember that the em ending is going to be the same for all of the accusative cases, but sometimes it'll change a little bit. So for example, you have to cut off the OR here, cut off the IS here, because this is an O, you've got to add an N. And because X is a combination of K and S, the K and S sound. And the Romans believed that K and G were basically the same consonant. So that's why the name Gaius is spelled with a C or a G, Gaius, Gaius. And you can kind of hear it. It's produced with the same part of the throat. And since X is K, S, K and S sound, if you take off the S, just like the S on Canis, it becomes rec or rec, right? Either REC or an REG sound. And then you just pop on that EM ending. And that's why rex goes to recem. So recem. See how that forms even in Latin. Latin's a very logical language. Even when something seems irregular, there's usually a reason for it. All right. And right down here, we see in the ablative just pop on the E in the same way that you would pop on that EM. Okay. Now we talked about these verbs before, but we'll do it a little bit more explicitly here. Asked as a linking verb, it'll take two nominatives. So think of it as an equal sign. So it's also called a copulate. That's the fancy term for it. So that's why you notice that it's not taking an accusative over here at the end. It's taking two nominatives. The second nominative is called a predicate nominative. Or if it's not a noun, if it's an adjective, it's called a predicate adjective. Now, doing verbs, we talked about how there's doing verbs express that there's an action, right? So you usually have a receiver of that action, although you don't always have the receiver of that action. If the verb is transitive, it will transfer action onto a direct object, and that is in the accusative. If it is intransitive, it will not transfer that action. And as we see demonstrated here, you can use a usually transitive verb intransitively. So For example, Caecilius ambulat, Caecilius walks. That is intransitive. There's no direct object to that. If you're saying that Caecilius is walking a dog, then the receiver of the action of walking is the dog, and that's why it's in the accusative right there. If it's intransitive, you can still modify it with a prepositional phrase. For example, Caecilius ambulat in via. So you get that ablative of location there describing where it's happening. But it's not taking a direct object. So even though it can be a transitive verb, it doesn't always have to be used transitively. So it can be used intransitively. Some verbs are always used intransitively. And we haven't seen any yet, really, but we'll see them later. Est is, by the way, intransitive. It's intransitive only because it will never take an accusative. Okay. As I said before, just focus on the T endings. The T endings in green. Also, as I've said before, the first three endings for first, second, and third person are OST. T is the third person singular ending. All right. And as I mentioned before earlier, salve is also a verb, and it is an imperative verb. I said that it literally means be healthy. We translate it as hello or hi, but it says a lot about their culture that greeting someone, you greet someone by ordering them to be healthy. It's kind of like saying have a nice day in English. If you notice that have a nice day, you're not suggesting they have a nice day. You're telling them to have a nice day. All right. We don't know about imperatives yet, but just know that salve with the E ending right there is a singular imperative. We'll later see plural infinitives, and they'll be something like salvete. So it'll have an ETE ending or an ITE ending. All right. I've mentioned these before, but let's go over it a little bit better. Quoque and non in that olive color are adverbs, so they clarify the action of the verb. So if you have quoque laborat, someone works as well. So you're saying that the action is happening to repeatedly or to more than one subject. A non-laborat, that means he does not work. So it's negating the action of the verb. Et is in turquoise, it's conjunction, so it'll link ideas or clauses. We saw in the last stage one noun being linked to two verbs. You could say that Caecilius ambulat et clamat. So Caecilius walks and shouts. Notice that you're not using Caecilius twice. He's the subject of both verbs, but without being explicitly stated as the subject of both verbs. Also, I think that I've mentioned this before. We haven't seen it, but Latin verbs do not need to take a subject. If you just say laborat, it will mean he, she, or it works. You don't need to put a pronoun there or a noun at all. All right. Laetissimus and iratus, we talked about adjectives and how they will modify the meaning of a noun. I think that I will give a little bit more information. Notice that laetissimus and Caecilius both end in US, just like iratus and Caecilius end in US. Adjectives will always match a noun in case, number, and gender. Case, number, and gender. That does not mean they have to match in declension. So their forms do not have to be the same, but they have to be the same case, number, and gender. Now notice right here, Caecilius est pater. Now pater is third declension, Caecilius is second declension. You can have a third declension adjective modifying a second declension noun. And lastly, this issimus ending right there. That is a superlative, and therefore it means very happy. Laetus means happy. Laetissimus means very happy. So if you see a issimus or issima ending in an adjective, you'll know that it means the most happy or the happiest or very happy. Those are the three ways you can usually translate something. Alrighty, let's keep going here. Oh, too far. There we go. And last little bit here. This is the new grammar for stage 3. I know I've been taking a little bit of time to review, but I think it's important early on in these stages. Now, the prepositions, the new prepositions that we will see are ad and a or x. And ad will be the first preposition that we see that will go with an accusative. In a preposition we've already seen before, can also take the accusative, but we don't want to confuse you too much. Ad means towards or at. Actually, the word at comes from the same word as ad, and it means towards, as I said. So it's a usage of the accusative called accusative of motion towards, or sometimes just accusative of orientation, because it's letting you know the space in which an action is happening. So if you were saying, for example, Caecilius ambulat ad templum, it means Caecilius is walking towards the temple. So his action is extending through space towards this space, this accusative noun that is the temple. In the same way, if you were saying Caecilius ambulat in templum, which we'll see later, it means that he walks into the temple. So it's extent into something. Okay. Now, X right here, X plus ablative. X will occur. This X right here will you'll see that form when it is in front of a vowel. So, for example, ex atrio means out of the atrium. But if it's in front of a consonant, for example, V like an awia, it'll drop off that X and it'll just be an E, a long E right there. So awia means out of the street. Ex atrio means out of or from the atrium. And this is the original usage of the ablative. It's the core usage of the ablative. Matter of fact, the root or etymology of the word ablative means to take away from, and it's called an ablative of separation. So it's expressing separation or removal from a space. So it's the exact opposite of accusative in a lot of ways. If you have the word of Caecilius ambulat in templo, so Caecilius walks into the temple, as opposed to Caecilius ambulat a templo, that means Caecilius is walking out of the temple. So this is an ablative of separation. He's separated from that space. And just to review, if we had an in there plus ablative, you would say Caecilius sedit in templo. Caecilius is sitting in the temple. Notice that the verb sedit is not really an action of motion into some place. He already is in the space. So he's not walking into the temple. He's existing in the space within the temple. So it's a place where, it's a location rather than a motion into usage. All right, we'll see some new vocabulary, and otherwise that's it for this stage. Hopefully that this review hasn't been too much, but I think it's really, really important that we get a lot of exposure to these concepts early on as we go through our journey in Latin. All right, I will see you in the next video as we go through the first translation for this chapter.